the debate has to move away from those generic statements about hydrogen is needed, CCS is expensive, and go into much more sophisticated and detailed view on each of the solutions. How can you apply it in a much more fit for purpose aspect?
Yes.
Whether it's for a specific industry, a specific region, a specific use case. This is how we need to have those debates now.
Welcome to an episode of Strategic Conversations. We host insightful discussions with top business leaders and business minds. Thank you for joining us today. We're hosting Mr. Damien Gerard, the VP of Carbon Capture and Storage at SLB. Mr. Gerard will be a speaker at the Houston Strategy Forum's upcoming 4th semi-annual Carbon Hydrogen Symposium. He's coming back to speak to us again, and we're looking forward and excited to host him. I'm Ravi Kathuria, the president of the Houston Strategy Forum and author of the management and leadership book, How Cohesive is Your Company, and author of Happy Soul, Hungry Mind. Strategic Conversations are hosted by the Houston Strategy Forum. If you value these conversations, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Houston Strategy Forum's YouTube channel. Today's episode is sponsored by Cohegic, the management consulting and executive coaching firm. Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion with Mr. Gerard. Damien, thank you for taking the time to be here today, and thank you for coming back to speak to the Houston Strategy Forum at our 4th semi-annual Carbon Hydrogen Symposium.
Glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me again.
Oh, absolutely. We had a great time last time, Damien, and I'm only excited. We're going to have a great discussion on November 29th. So I want to jump right into it. The theme, Damien, for our November 29th Carbon Hydrogen Symposium is making the right bets, right? About 3 years ago, this environmental and climate change focus, new energy evolution focus started in earnest, right? Because companies started focusing on it. It was evident that needed to be addressed. Now, 3 years have gone by. We have looked at various technologies, different processes. Is it time to start refining the bets? Is it too early? If it is time to refine the bets, what are the right bets to make? Both for companies, for communities, for countries, but even as individual professionals who are trying to build the right career, right? How do we decide? How do we choose the right bets?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball and had the final answer. I'd be a rich man. But it's true that over the last 5 years, say, since the Paris Agreement, and then some of the governments coming up with their own policies about decarbonizing, the discussion has always been very high level. It's about relative reduction in CO2 compared to previous dates, and some kind of broad level assessment of what needs to happen with regards to energy efficiency, maybe introduction of new fuels and technologies like carbon capture, on top of what already exists around renewables and other things.
Right.
These are very broad conversation.
Yes.
These are large buckets of solutions. What does it mean in reality? What if you look at any of those solutions as a whole, it can be translated in many different ways and forms.
Yeah.
Hydrogen or introduction of new fuels. For what purpose? In what industries? At what scale? We already have a lot of hydrogen. So, of course, we want to have decarbonized hydrogen as opposed to the one that exists today. Yeah. But now the conversation is moving away from those broad solutions, which by and large, we understand we'll probably need all of them in some order of magnitude, maybe differently in different regions based on what resources you have in those countries. But then is how do you implement them in your own reality, in your own backyard?
Yeah.
And this is the question that a lot of companies are facing right now. It's not anymore about whether you need carbon capture or not. Probably we do need a good level of carbon capture and sequestration, for example,
Yes.
but in which application? What industries are more prone to that? How can you do that cost effectively? And each of those segments will have different realities. If you take an industry, for example, like cement, the cement industry doesn't have many other options beyond being more efficient as to how they produce cement,
Yes.
and beyond changing the fuel that they use for their boiler in the kiln. Beyond that, they will unavoidably have remaining emissions that are unabatable unless you capture them and you do something about the CO2. So this is an industry that is directly exposed to a carbon abatement technology.
Right.
But some others, like a coal-fired power plant, has alternative. You could actually produce power cost effectively using existing technologies like renewables.
Yeah.
And therefore, these discussions are a bit more nuanced as to
Yes.
what constitutes the best option.
Yeah, I mean, great point, Damien, is that first, there has to be the solution, the grand solution will involve some combination of all of these, right? But at some point, we have to start focusing and going big on a few of these, right? And you talked about you're focused on carbon capture, and you talked about how to abate industries like the cement industry, the steel industry. Of course, even steel is looking at maybe changing their products, right? And so can they make pipes or not using steel? And so you have all these applications that are questioning themselves if there is an alternative process. Can we change the process itself, right? You talked about coal-fired plants. Can we replace that with natural gas plants? Can we replace that with renewables, right? And so then we do it. And then we come to industries like the chemical industry or the cement industry, where the process could be changed, but not as drastically as replacing coal with natural gas to generate power, right? You still have to have that process, and then you have carbon being generated. So in these situations, you will still need to capture the carbon, because there is a carbon dioxide that is going to be generated, and that will have to be captured. What is in terms of carbon capture? We have direct air capture, we have point source capture. Where would you bet? How would you choose that if carbon capture has to be? And I guess I should ask that question. You're obviously in the field, but it's a fair question to ask for my audience. Do you see carbon capture as an integral part of the solution? And then if yes, where do you see the biggest bang for the buck? Where is it the most effective to invest company money, but also community money, right? I mean, because at the end of it, when companies succeed, communities succeed.
Well, there is a realistic view about this, and then there is the optimistic view or the wishful view about what should happen. Ideally, we should decrease our dependence on fossil fuel, and within 10 years not use fossil fuel anymore, and all live happily with renewables. But this is not going to happen. Right. The reality today is that 80% of the energy, everybody knows that, is from fossil fuel derived, and will continue so in the decades to come. So as much as I would like to have a discussion around why we perpetuating the life of fossil fuel, etc., this is the world in which we're living. And this is the economy, and the world has been built really on those pillars. And if it's a reality that we have to accept, then what can we do about this? Right. So therefore, in those situations, solutions such as carbon capture and sequestration will have to play a part, but not solely for perpetuating oil and gas, as some advocates will put it, but actually because in many cases there's not much else you can do, or this is the best solution available for a certain set of assets existing in the world. Yeah. And so when you see where would you start, where's your biggest return for your buck, there is a natural cost curve of deployment of CCS around the world. And not all emissions and not all molecule of CO2 in the air is born equal when it comes to trying to capture it and dispose of it. So you start obviously where it's cheaper to get access to the CO2, the ammonia plant that already has an existing facility around separating different gases to produce ammonia,
Right.
and in the process already has a byproduct, if you wish, of CO2. So you
Yes.
don't need to capture it.
Yeah.
It will be nearly criminal to continue building new plants without thinking of having a carbon capture associated with that and a disposal of that CO2. So you'd think that any new production of ammonia
Yes.
should be carbon-free.
Yes.
It has to be carbon-free.
Yes.
And in fact, all the existing ammonia plants should also be decarbonized as a matter of priority.
It's the lowest hanging fruit. You have the CO2, they're already separating it. You just have to capture it and sequester it.
Totally. Equally, there is a very large asset base of biofuels and ethanol production, whether it being in Brazil or in the Midwest of the United States.
Yes.
These are all plants that through the fermentation process naturally produce a lot of pure CO2.
Yes.
Well, these are good place to start. However, these are relatively small plants in terms of emissions, just by the design of those ethanol plants. And therefore, you need to find ways to effectively, if you wish, collect the CO2 from several of those plants and having a collection system just like sewage or garbage disposal landfill. So these are the places where you'd start, but you can go way beyond that. You can create new industries around decarbonized fuels. We talked about hydrogen, and possibly every new molecule of hydrogen that we produce in the future, whether it from natural gas or coal, should also come with the capacity to capture the CO2 and then dispose of it. And therefore, it is possible that the hydrogen plant of the future looks quite different from the ones that we have today, because the ones we have today were not designed in a way that you can capture easily the CO2 out of this. But the new generation using ATRs or POX, etc., might be best and better suited than the ones that we have today. So you'll have a change in technology in how you produce some of the commodities in such a way that you can more easily capture the CO2. But that's where you start. You start where you have large concentration of easily accessible CO2 sources, and you have plenty of those around the world. And then from there, you create these anchor tenants, if you wish, that allow you to then go to your neighbor and the next after that and create economies of scale in transport and storage.
And so speaking about, you stress the point about having a network like sewage collection or garbage collection, right? Collecting CO2 from all of these sources, whether they are biofuel spots or whether they're ammonia, right? Or whether it's a power plant burn using natural gas and producing CO2. All of these places have CO2 and they have to be combined. Do you think the midstream capability exists? ExxonMobil bought Denbury and all of its CO2 pipelines. Is that, how easily can we get there? What is the kind of infrastructure that is going to be needed? And I don't know if the pipelines have to be large pipelines or these are small, narrow pipelines, because not an individual biofuel plant is producing that quantity of CO2. How do we collect it? Or do we do something else? Hydrogen has, and we're going to talk about hydrogen on November 29th, but hydrogen has an issue and a big issue of transportation, right? To transport hydrogen is a big issue. Should we figure out how to generate hydrogen closer to the sources of CO2, combine the CO2 with hydrogen, and then actually produce renewable fuels, right? And then those are easier to transport? Or does that open another complication? So what is easier, to move the CO2 or combine the CO2 with something else and then it moves, right?
These are many questions, Ravi, and I'll try to address them one by one. I can see you a lot of energy there, but first, in terms of transporting CO2, there's nothing really too complicated about transporting CO2. In fact, we already transport vast quantities of CO2 around the world, predominantly in the United States. This is something that's been proven. It can be done at very, very large scale. And there's a lot we can learn from transporting oil and natural gas and other commodities around the world. You think about a tree with some branches, you have a trunk line and some smaller lines that go into each of the individual plants. This is not really the complication.
Okay.
But as you have observed in the market in the last couple of months, as projects start going from feasibility and assessment into execution, this is where you realize there's a lot of unknown aspects of the project that are coming to the surface now. It's not a problem of technical aspect. It's a problem of public acceptance, being able to have the regulators on board, having your permits on time. And these are all issues that are starting to appear as projects mature and go closer and closer to FID, things that were not apparent during the first phase of development. But now this is where a lot of projects are actually being kicked into the long grass, stopped, delayed, or canceled altogether just because of other issues not related to the technical aspect, which again is something that can be controlled and can be done, but with all the new things that are coming up, because new technologies, new solutions coming to the market always come with a level of some resistance, in part because there might be some lack of understanding as to what this is really about and what it's trying to do, in part because there's still a bit of a regulatory vacuum in some aspect to know exactly how to go about developing those complex assets, cross states, etc. But in essence, it can be done. Now, in reality, though, each region will face its own difficulties. Right. For hydrogen, it's very difficult to talk about hydrogen as a molecule, as a business model, because it can be translated into hundreds of different ways and forms, and whether it's used for transportation, whether it's used for large captive use in some plants, etc. These will all be different forms and shapes. Ideally, you will want to produce your hydrogen close to your use point, because as you say, it's very complicated to transport unless you have small quantities by truck or whatnot. But otherwise, you'd want to produce it close to your consuming point. And of course, if you're talking about transportation, going into long haul and maritime and trucks, etc. This comes with its own logistics issue as to how you produce the hydrogen, where, how do you store it, how do you make use of it. I mean, each of those will come with its own degree of complication, technical issues.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds to me the bet that you are recommending is go after the lowest hanging CO2 that we can find quickly in ammonia plants or biofuels or other places, and then capture that. And then, to your point, the infrastructure can be built or exists to move the CO2, right? And so you can sequester.
Well, this is where you naturally start. Of course, people are talking about DAC and other solutions, yes. But frankly, if we cannot capture the CO2 from an ethanol plant, which comes with 100% pure out of the stack, let alone going after a very dilute stream in the air. Yes. So there is a natural evolution as to how you go about carbon abatement. But that being said, I think we need in parallel to go after the big sectors that will need to scale at some stage. We talked about cement, we talked about steel. There are some major milestones that need to happen over the next 2 to 3 years to demonstrate that at least it can be done. Yeah. And you will see in the next year, the cement industry, for example, will come up with many different FID, so that the final investment decision will be announced on several of those plants in the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. And these will be crucial moments to just galvanize in people's mind, aha, this is happening. There are people now who stop talking about this, right, and are putting steel in the ground and are building those plants for hundreds of millions of dollars. And once that happens, these are crucial moments in an industry to say, maybe I should do the same, or we should look at this as a real option. It's not a dream pipe anymore. This is something that is happening. And you need to have that in cement, in steel, in ammonia, in many of those industries as proof point of those new solutions.
Sir, what message would you like to deliver on November 29th? What will be your message to the world when you come to the Houston Strategy Forum?
I think that the way from those generic statements about hydrogen is needed, CCS is expensive, and go into much more sophisticated and detailed view on each of the solutions. How can you apply it in a much more fit for purpose aspect?
Yes.
Whether it's for a specific industry, a specific region, a specific use case. This is how we need to have those debates now.
Yes.
The difficulty is that it's less scalable as renewables like solar and wind. The solar farm is pretty much the same look and feel everywhere you go in the world.
Yes.
If new solutions are coming, will be more tailored and bespoke.
Yes.
But this is how we need to start looking at it in much more detail.
Very good. Well, I'm looking forward to hosting you, sir. We're going to have an in-depth, a detailed discussion. I appreciate the last point that you made is that it's time to move away from generic overall statements to really get down to where the rubber meets the road. I hope everyone who has watched this video will join us November 29th. Come engage with Mr. Gerard here, pick his brain, learn from him, give him ideas on where he should focus and where we should, as companies and as communities, make the right bets, because it is time to refine the bets. Join us on November 29th at the Carbon Hydrogen Symposium. Thank you for watching this. Thank you, Mr. Gerard, for taking the time. I'm looking forward to seeing you in just a few weeks here.
See you soon.